Welcome to Up an Octave, a podcast by Sonivia. I'm your host, Rue Spence, founder of Sonivia, the podcast management agency that helps women and non-binary people take up space in podcasting. Up an Octave is here to support you in your podcasting journey, from how to market yourself, how to sound great, how to edit for your specific voice, and how to make your podcast feel like magic. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into it. Welcome back to Up an Octave. Today I am passing the mic to Erin and Meghann from My Skeptical Sister. This show is so close to my heart and I love these ladies to the moon and back, so it was so fun to get to sit down and chat with them about their podcast, how they've become so successful, built a thriving online community, and even have a Patreon that pays. So if any of those things are something that you are hopeful for or working to grow in your own podcast, buckle up because this is going to be one heck of a ride. Hello, Erin and Meghann. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on Up an Octave. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here. I'm pretty good.
I'm fair to middling.
So because there are two of you, can you go ahead and introduce yourselves one by one just so that folks can get to know your voices?
Sure. I am Erin, the believer. I almost did it wrong. I'm sorry. I'm Erin, the believer.
I'm Meghann, the skeptical one.
There we go. Okay. It's because Meghann usually goes first that Erin tried to steal her part.
That's right. I was like, do I usually say my name? I couldn't remember.
It's like you're on autopilot because you've done it so much.
Right.
So you guys host My Skeptical Sister, which is such a fun concept. Erin, as you struggled to mention, you are the believer out of the two of you. And Meghann, you are the skeptic. And each week you guys read ghost stories that people send in. How fun is that?
We have a blast for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you guys got started in November 2020. Is that correct?
Yes, during the pandemic.
Yeah. And you guys are both educators. So I know that time was absolutely chaotic for you. What made you decide to start your show then?
Well, we've talked for years about how we should have a podcast because we have good chemistry. I mean, we've known each other our whole lives, at least my whole life. She had to go 4 miserable years without me. But but we listened to podcasts all the time and thought, wouldn't it be fun to have one? But we never knew what we were going to do our show about. You know, like you got to have some kind of concept. And when we discovered our polar opposites on beliefs when it comes to the paranormal, we knew we had something we could talk about.
Yeah. And we also decided that, the pandemic, it was a crazy time and we were actually quarantining together because we live across the street from one another. And, as everyone knows during that time, there was no beginning and end to your week. It was just one long, miserable time. So we decided we needed to do something to kind of break up the monotony and give us a reason to live. And our kids just weren't enough to do that. So we decided to create a podcast and there we go.
So was it hard to get on board with doing a show about ghosts when you don't believe in them?
Oh, no. I love a good ghost story. And Erin and I can remember being real little and making her watch X-Files and all sorts of like creepy, scary shows. And so it definitely it wasn't a hard push at all because we love talking about paranormal and creepy things, but we just didn't know that we had that difference in opinion until like a porch night. We were sitting out there one time and I said, we don't really think ghosts are real, do you? And that blew her mind. So
yeah, because as just mentioned, we grew up with her making me watch horrible, scary shows all the time. I thought it was her jam. I thought this was what we were both all about.
That's crazy that you didn't realize that you had such diametrically opposed views until that moment.
Exactly.
So with getting your show started in the middle of the pandemic, I can relate because I started my first show during the pandemic as well. How did you actually get started? I mean, how did you go from just sister conversations on the porch to recording and RSS feeds and, okay, we're doing this?
It has been a real slow progression. So I had been listening to some podcasts and I listened to a lot of little podcasts with, smaller audiences. And I had heard on one of their commercials about Anchor, which is no longer Anchor anymore. It's now Spotify for podcasters, but it was a free platform that would distribute your podcast. So I heard about that and thought, well, I mean, if it's free, it's not like a big risk I'm taking by setting up an account there. So we started recording on that, and we literally, our first, 20 episodes, we were recording on just my little AirPods. I would put in one and she would put in one. And our audio, it left a little to be desired. And I would also edit on that Spotify app, which is a really basic way to edit. Like, you can't move anything around. You can just take some things out. And when I go back and listen now, I mean, we left coughs in, it was rough. We did that for a while. And then I thought, well, let's we'll look into a different mic. And we ended up getting a couple different mic options. Actually, Megan's husband was he kept buying us mics, or her mics, for like Christmas. He's like, well, maybe try this one. So we tried a couple that way, but eventually we found you and got better.
For anyone who's not familiar, I help Erin and Meghann edit sometimes. And so I've actually gone into the archives to listen back to those way back episodes. And I didn't realize that you were sharing one set of AirPods for those, because I've listened and I've definitely heard the glow up. I'm not going to say I don't, but I didn't realize that that's how you were recording those. That's awesome. Yeah, you've definitely come a far, far way.
I know. We've got like mic stands now, and it's legit.
So professional.
It is actually too legit to quit. We've invested too much. We have to do this forever now. I now understand that song.
You're such a dork.
Okay, fair to Midland, whatever.
So the other thing that I have watched evolve in your show is you guys do a segment called Fan Favorite. How did you decide to have that segment on every single episode of your show? Because it's not about ghosts. It's something that you kind of share some love with your fans and let them kind of have the spotlight for a minute. So how'd that come about?
Well, it was kind of my idea, but really we kind of noticed like this little community that we've built has kind of become like pretty tight knit, which is like something we didn't see coming our way. We have a little Facebook group and it's grown, it's gotten pretty big. But we just kind of started to getting to know our fans a lot more. I guess that was just kind of an unexpected twist. And then we started noticing that a lot of them have some pretty creative talents, and they had like their own little small businesses, and they were doing some really cool stuff. And so I just thought, it would be really cool just to mention somebody who supports us, like just to give thanks and gratitude back to them, and maybe, help bring this community even closer. So if you're looking for a little gift and we have a fan that makes earrings or makes jewelry, then that might be a perfect little way for that person to be supported and then get to know one another. And so it just kind of grew from there. It is a weekly segment, which is a lot of work. And Erin begrudgingly let me have it as a little segment on our podcast. So then she made it it was my work to do, because I mean, let's be honest, Erin carries this podcast. She does a lot of the work. She did all of the editing. She does all of the artwork for the Patreon cards. She is in it to win it, and I'm just along to look pretty beside her. So,
well, we also thought it was a fun way of pulling people in. Like if you knew your name was going to be mentioned, you want to tune into that. And so that's another way to kind of get that audience pull back in, even if they have maybe stopped listening. We could be like, hey, we noticed that, I don't know if they stopped listening, but it's a good way to get them back in because they know they're going to be mentioned. And I'd tease her about hating to do it, but really I'm an socially awkward. I always hated reaching out to people like, hey, thank you. I'm going to talk. I didn't like that part. So she took over for me. So now I tease her that I don't like it, but I actually do. It's great.
Yeah. So the Facebook group is actually something that I wanted to talk about, because you really do have a thriving and, as you mentioned, a very tight-knit community. How did you foster that? I mean, did you start the group? Was that fan started? What did that look like?
Oh, gosh, it's been so long now. We started it, I think.
Jody started it, actually.
Jody started it.
A good friend of mine, of both of ours, but I've known her the longest. I win. But no, she's great. She's awesome. And she was she latched on when she found out we were doing this podcast. She just couldn't believe it and thought it was the best idea. So she started really kind of getting it out there on Facebook and promoting us on Facebook. And then she came up with the idea of, hey, what if we had like you had your own Facebook page for the podcast? And so we're like, oh, that's a great idea. So she's actually one of the managers of the Facebook group as well. So she can kind of decide who comes in and out and all of those things and helps us regulate it. But she's hilarious because she stopped listening a long time ago to the podcast, which cracks me up. But she's like, she can't get down with any podcast, not just ours. It's not her thing. So she tried. She thought it was great for a while, and then she's like, I gave up. But she still helps us with the Facebook group and is definitely a big part of the community, even if she's not a listener, which is fine with us. We don't care.
Yeah, you have such a thriving group where, I mean, every week people are in there giving breakdowns on, I loved this part of the episode, commenting on, oh my gosh, I can't believe Meghann didn't believe this part. So that's really, really wonderful to see. The other thing I want to touch on that's, again, community-based, because for folks who are still maybe thinking about starting a podcast or are still in that baby phase, you've really, as you said, you're too legit to quit at this point. You've really got the dang thing going. Let's talk about Patreon, because you have a really vibrant Patreon community as well. You have two offerings, a $3 and a $5 tier. One of them includes bonus content, but then the more elevated tier, that's actually a movie night where people get to basically have a sleepover with you on Discord. So let's talk about Patreon. When did you know it was time to start monetizing in that capacity?
That was really fan led. We had a couple people reaching out like, hey, we want to support you guys. What can we do? And we thought, that is so silly. Like, we are so little. And it was pretty early on, actually, that somebody started suggesting it. So again, I looked on Patreon and they do charge, like, you have to pay a percentage of your earnings. But if you don't have a single Patreon, you're not paying that website. So I thought, well, it's not going to hurt anything to have it. And almost immediately, we got a few people hop on. I mean, I know Rochelle was like the first one. She was in it. And then, just a couple started coming in, and some of those are still with us, which is amazing. So we started building it from there. And I have always been a big movie nerd. I love movies. And when I love a movie, I love to listen to the commentary. So I don't even care if I can't hear what's happening in the movie. So that kind of sparked the idea. But I had also listened to this podcast called It's Not Around Anymore. It was a Twilight podcast because I love Twilight. And they would, like, after the whole season of the book was over, they watched the movie with their Patreons. And the whole time they're like, this is so weird. And it was just like you could read what people were saying. And then the hosts were commenting on that. And I thought, well, that's kind of fun. And I really liked those nights. And so I thought, well, that would be one thing to kind of pull people in, because it's like a fun thing to do. It's like on a Thursday night, and we don't do it too late. We do it once a month. And we have like the people who come every month usually come every month. And then we have a couple stragglers who are like, hey, I've missed the last few, but we have like a core of probably at this point, it's like 10 people who come every month. And then we have a couple straggle in, and it's so much fun.
I know sometimes it can be really hard to put yourself out there and ask for that contribution. So it's really cool that your listeners were actually the ones who instigated that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I would suggest if you have it out there, I know in the past I've been like, well, maybe, and I'll look and see if my podcast that I'm listening to has a Patreon. And if they do, it's like, well, it's right there. It's only, $3. I can handle $3, and you're just signed up. So like I said, it doesn't cost anything to have it. If you don't, if you're not making money, you're not spending money. So it's not a bad idea just to have one.
Absolutely.
I will say a little piece of advice though is before we got real fancy and decided to hire you, Rue, as an editor, we thought it was just like fun play money. So the first couple months that we were racking money in, we're like, let's go to get an all seafood dinner. And boy, we just flew through that. My drinks are on us. We're my skeptical sister, and then we figured out we needed an editor to make Erin's. And now we kind of regret those days, although they were fun times.
They were a lot of fun. But if I could go back, I'd be like, chill out a little bit.
Yeah, we had pedicures. We were doing all sorts of fun stuff.
So let's talk about that. I have been so fortunate to be brought in on the team. How did you know that it was time to get some support with editing?
Editing is my least favorite part about the podcast. And I don't know if that's going to be the same for everybody, but it is something that I had to teach myself how to do. And I was really, really picky in the beginning. You've actually kind of taught me a lot, because sometimes I'll listen and you'll leave something and then I'm like, oh, I would have cut that. And then I'm like, well, that's just how we were talking, and that's fine. So I've kind of calmed down a little bit about taking every little, extra breath out and whatever. So, but I really just don't like it. It takes me, I don't know how long it takes most people to edit, but to edit our hour-long podcast takes me about 3 to 5 hours every time I do it. And I am miserable for it. So I was like, Meghann, we got to do something. I can't keep doing this. And I had found you in a Facebook group for podcasters, which is another great resource I've used learning how to be a podcaster, because I'll go to that Facebook group and go, hey, this is what's happening. And somebody will say, oh, this is what we did. And okay, great. So that little community is very helpful too. But you had posted something like, hey, I know how to edit podcasts if anybody's interested. And way before we could afford it, I reached out like, I can't afford you yet, but I need a goal and I need to know what I'm working towards so that I can afford you. And then that was our like manifest. We were like, this is what we have to start making. And it started with once a month. And that was enough to like get me through a slump where I thought I can't keep doing this. And then we got to twice a month. And now, you know, it might happen where one day I don't ever have to edit again. And that's my dream. That's my dream.
That's funny because I actually didn't really necessarily know the whole of that story, because I was kind of co-manifesting you guys because you slid into my DMs like a year before we actually started working together.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is my show, you know, and I was like, oh, that's so freaking cool. I listened and I was like, oh man, I really want to work on this show because I'm pretty picky about what projects I take on, because I, like you said, it can take 3 hours for one podcast. Yeah. I want to like what I'm listening to.
Yeah.
And so I was like, man, this is like Ghosts. It's so fun. You guys remind me of me and my sister. Like, this is a blast. And I was just like, man, I really hope they come back. And then I never heard from you again. And I was like, well, if it happens, it happens. And then a year later, you were like, hey, remember me? I have pedicure money now that I'd actually like to spend on an editor.
That's right. Yeah, you never left my mind for that whole year. I would be like, one day we're going to pay Rue. I talked about you before we ever started talking. Other than that first, I would be like, Rue money. This is going to be Rue money.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Too funny.
And it's funny too that you bring up where you're a little bit more particular about like getting that specific breath out, because I think that that's so true for learning to edit. Like, I listened back to my earlier episodes when I was in a very similar position with my first podcast, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I was kind of baptism by fire, self-teaching myself as I was going. And I was so particular on like not sounding like a human being. I was like, I don't want to have any filler words. I don't want to have any dogs in the background. I don't want to have anything. If I say, if I cough, if I breathe too hard, get it out of there. If I don't sound like an AI voiceover, I don't want it.
Funny.
Right.
And I realized that, like, especially with you being such a community-led show, that it is those little moments of humanity within reason that are what's so attractive. People know Ellie, which is Erin's dog, who is often a guest star as she walks around and tries to get comfortable.
Yep. She's snoring in the background now, but she's not close to Megan's mic anymore since Megan's at her house. Normally you'd hear her right now.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are some times where, you know, obviously you want to sound as polished as possible, but part of it, especially when part of your shtick is being two sisters sitting on the couch chatting, it should sound like you're at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
As you've grown over the last, it's almost been, 4 years, right? Yeah.
Not 3 years. No, because we started 2020, November 2020. We just did 3 years. Yep.
I don't know what year it is anymore. As you were saying, like, you know, weeks didn't really matter. I feel like it's still 2020. I'm like, oh yeah, last year in 2019. And I'm like, oh God, that was 5 years ago, girl. Over these 3 years with podcasting, what do you feel like have been the biggest lessons that you've learned for both of you?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, that's a deep question. Let me see. Sometimes we sit down and think, we'll say to each other, I've got nothing to talk to you about tonight. Like, I've got no filler. I've got no banter, because we are a banter heavy podcast. And then we sit down and then we have like all the pressure's off. As soon as we sit down, we always end up talking for forever about something. So that's been helpful to be like, just calm down. People like that this is our vibe. And sometimes it's not a full hour episode. Sometimes it's 45 minutes, and that's also fine. So just kind of relaxing a little bit has been helpful.
One thing I keep trying to drive home with Erin is that all of this just started for fun. And so sometimes we'll both get a little caught up in numbers. You know, if we'll see like our numbers for a week aren't as high as they usually are. We can kind of spin a little bit with that. And then we just kind of have to both get a little grounded and think like, hey, this isn't, this is just for our entertainment. Like, let's remember back to why we started this. It was to be fun and lighthearted. And once it becomes too much work, then that's kind of when we know we'll need to stop. But right now, we're still having a blast with it. So when we kind of get to those moments where we start to worry about why our numbers aren't as high as they are some weeks or things like that, just trying to find that, just stay grounded. It's okay. It's all just for entertainment. It's all just for fun. And if we can put a little bit of good out there and have some people laugh, then that's what it's about. But we don't have to take it so seriously. So sometimes we'll both do it. Sometimes we'll both get caught up in those numbers, and that's kind of something to keep yourself in check with, I think.
Yeah, this isn't going to be our career, probably.
No.
This is our fun side hustle.
Yeah.
That's really good advice, especially about the numbers. I know that it's really easy to get caught up on those metrics, especially when you're trying to factor in monetization or there's a specific threshold that you're trying to meet. So that's really important because I hear from people who are like, I missed a week and I promised I'd stay consistent. And oh my God. And it's like, while you don't ever want to miss a week, it's not like you missed a heart surgery. Like no one's going to die if you don't get a podcast out this week. And so I think that keeping the fun spirit, keeping the joy in it is so critical.
Yeah, for sure.
As we're talking about you guys being kind of a bigger show, you've done a live show.
Oh, we've done 3. Yeah.
3? Yeah. Okay. I didn't realize it was 3. Can we talk about those?
Oh, yeah. I hate them. No, I'm kidding.
I kind of make Erin do them.
She does. I'm just really nervous when I do them. I black out for the whole thing. And afterwards, I'm like, did I say anything funny? She's like, yeah, you were funny. I'm like, oh, gosh.
Yeah.
For people who are maybe interested in doing a live show, how did those come about?
Well, a friend of mine, she worked at an event called Oldham County Third Turn out in Oldham County. And it's like, it's a little brewery and it's a little restaurant. And they have some outdoor garden areas that are beautiful. And they like to do live events out there. And so she started becoming a listener of the podcast. And she reached out to me and said, hey, you guys should come out here and do a live show. And I was like, no way, that would be crazy. So of course it was one of those things we didn't really think would happen, but that's her whole job. She's an event coordinator, or was. She made it happen. She made us posters and started advertising. And before we knew it, the night had come, and then we were there with our mic checks. And we really have been very fortunate because we have a lot of connections like that, just locally. Friends like Jody's our manager, the one we joke about being our manager who doesn't listen to our podcast. Her husband, Rick, is a sound guy. So he knew how to do all the sound and he volunteered to do it for free the first time. And so we just had kind of it was just like this great little, like everybody kind of came together to make it happen. And we went with it. And I think our live show, the first one we ever did, was by far my most favorite. It was just,
it was really fun.
It was just a very magical night. We had a lot of our friends in the audience, but then we also had people who were just at the restaurant and they were like, oh, what's this about? And they stopped in, and then now they still listen. And so, it was just a great night. And so that's how that one came about. And then again, Jody kind of put together the second one with a friend of ours who she does ghost tours locally. And so we kind of like synced up and worked out something with her where afterwards people who wanted to pay a little extra could actually go on a ghost tour around Louisville. So we've just done, lots of little fun things. And then our last one was again back at Third Turn. So we've kind of always talked about maybe there's a second Third Turn here in Louisville that's a little bit closer to us. And it's supposedly in a haunted, can you hear my air quotes? Can you feel them?
Yeah, I can hear it.
A haunted bar. And so we've kind of toyed with the idea of maybe doing some sort of live show there in the future. But I got to work Erin up into it.
She does. But I would say if you don't have those connections already, find a little bar or place that has like open mic nights and maybe just talk to that manager and be like, hey, I know you do some kind of events, on these nights, but I wanted to do a show. Our first 2, we've had 2 that were free. You didn't pay anything for them. The one with the ghost tour, we had a little bit of a pay to get in just so that we could pay the ghost tour host basically. But we did them for free, but it was really good publicity. And like we saw our numbers go up a little bit after that, which was nice. word of mouth got out just from being in a public space where people were like, what's happening over there? So, I mean, even if you're doing a free show locally, invite some of your friends to, fill the audience if you're a little bit nervous, but, people will come. It's pretty cool.
So do you think that word of mouth is like the biggest way that you get your name out?
Yeah, I think 100%. That is the best way we have gotten our name out. What we really need all the time are stories. That's probably our hardest part about the entire thing, even harder than editing, is just making sure we always have a good story to read, a nice, scary story. If we don't have stories to read, we don't have a podcast that week. So, and we luckily, knock on wood, haven't come to that yet completely. But we go out to a lot of Facebook pages and that are ghost themed and kind of hustle for stories. But, that's kind of hard to do. But once you go out and you're like, hey, we've got a podcast, usually somebody is like, oh, what's your podcast? Or, literally anytime I'm on any Facebook page that says, I'm looking for a good podcast, which happens all the time, I immediately go in and I look in the comments to see if any of our loyal people are in there. And a lot of times they do. So that's exciting. But if they don't, I'm like, well, I've got one I'd love for you to check out. And I've recently started putting a link like with the suggestion instead of just throwing our name out there. Because I know it's really easy to be like, oh, yeah, I'll check that out. And then you forget about it. But if that link is right there, I'm more likely to click on that link and take me right to it. And then it will pop up again next time I'm in that, whatever my podcast. I don't remember what you call those things. The way you listen to a podcast.
Podcatcher.
Podcatcher.
Yeah. That's definitely helpful. Have you ever found like that you are not able to self-promote? Because I know some people are sometimes worried that in like Facebook groups, you'll get kicked out or like you'll get in trouble if you do self-promote. Have you ever run into that?
Yes. Yeah.
We've
been kicked out of a couple groups.
Scandalous.
We've been kicked out of some Reddit groups. I was like, I got kicked out once because somebody said, I'm looking for a good scary podcast. And I was like, hey, you should check out ours. And they're like, you are banned for self-promoting. I'm like, I was answering a question. But yeah, I got banned for that. Whatever. We did have one lady get real mad at us.
She gave me permission to read her story. I told her she had a good story and it was on one of those Facebook pages. And I asked her if we could read it on our podcast. And she was really excited about it. And I tried to warn her. I said, we are, like, here's the premise. I'm a skeptic, so I'll probably try to debunk your story. So anyway, she heard the story and she did not have a very good reaction. So apparently she was a moderator of that Facebook group as well. So she definitely had some words to say about me. And then
she got on that page and was like, do not let these people read your stories. And it sounded like I read it and thought, oh my gosh, because it sounded like we were bullied. I mean, it sounded we were so mean. And we are very respectful. Meghann is very respectful when she's debunking. But
I try to be.
Yeah, but she was like, they convinced me to do this. And then they said my story was a lie and it was not a lie. And all these people were like, oh, that's horrible. Oh, these awful girls. They were so scandalized. And I had to get on and be like, hey, really, if you could maybe listen to the podcast, and we're not really that bad. I said, we're called My Skeptical Sister. We gave a good warning. And then some people were like, oh, well, it's called My Skeptical Sister. It kind of sounds like that was the point. We're like, yeah, kind of. So she did get on. I sent her a direct message and I was like, I am really sorry that you were offended. That was never our intent. But that is, we do debate back and forth and you're kind of blowing us up right now. And she was like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'll take down the post. And she was nice about it. She took it down, but she was mad about it.
So you have really high reviews on Spotify and Apple, or high ratings, I mean. You are sitting at a 5-star on Spotify and like a 4.9 on Apple. How do you manage to keep your ratings that high when you do talk about A, kind of a taboo subject, and then B, do it in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way?
Well, we're hilarious, Rue. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask. Are we allowed to cuss in your podcast?
Yeah, definitely.
No, I think a lot of it is just, we are light about ourselves. We make fun of ourselves. We're definitely not perfect people, and we just like to have a good time. And it's funny and it's lighthearted. And yeah, I don't think that it's really like if you're coming on to listen to our podcast to be inspired or any sort of like, you're looking for advice, even though I love to give free unsolicited advice all the time. I tried to make that one of our Patreon things, but nobody took the bait. But we're not there for that, so it's would kind of be like ridiculous if you got on there and just left a really bad rating because we weren't your cup of tea. It's like, it's just light and it's funny and it's silly. So that's what it should be taken as.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely at the end of every episode ask, hey, rate, review, subscribe. Like that really helps our page get out there, please do that. So we ask for those positive reviews all the time, and we'll joke around, be like, grab somebody's phone and give us a positive review on their phone, but I don't think they actually do that.
I bet we have a few listeners that really do that. We have a few that are like our hardcore loyal fans that I could see them doing that.
That's true. One of them got a tattoo of our la 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 la.
Is that for real?
Yeah.
What? Okay, so I've never spoken to someone before who had a podcast tattoo or had someone get a tattoo of their podcast. Tell me about that.
It's probably the most shocking thing that's ever happened in my entire life.
Absolutely.
When we get a new Patreon, we send out a little card with a ghost, it's really like a person in a sheet. So like it's a ghost, but you see their little feet underneath it. And then, it's like, I drew it and it says, thanks for joining Patreon. And we write a little note, and somebody got that ghost tattooed on them. And then above it, it says our tag, which is Meghann's son, Miles, says, la, 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 at the end of every episode. And it says that right over the ghost. And it was very weird, but cool. It was very cool. It was actually really incredibly cool. But like, oh my gosh, I think we've made it.
That's so surreal. Like, holy cow.
I know.
That is really, really dope. I can only imagine how otherworldly and also incredibly flattering that would be.
Yeah, for sure.
As we wrap up, which I mean, I could definitely keep this going forever and keep chatting with you guys, because I do spend a lot of time listening to you while I edit and then getting to chat with you guys as well. So it feels like a big party. But as we let the listeners go for the evening, what is like a piece of takeaway advice you'd have for someone who's still kind of thinking about starting a podcast, or maybe is in that infancy stage of having a podcast?
My advice would be to look for all of your free resources, because there really are a lot of free things that can help you out. Like Audacity is an incredible program. I can't believe it's free, that you can edit on, and it's like professional like editing. And before I had you as my incredible resource, I would YouTube everything. Like, how do I do this? I'm trying to make this happen, and I don't know. So I would YouTube just like basic how to work Audacity and learn how to edit that way. And then, we found a platform that puts our content out there for us, so we don't have to think about it, which is great. So those free resources, like before you spend a lot of money investing, make sure you really like it first and do it as cheaply as possible to get started. And then once you're like, oh no, I really like this, it's time to start investing. That's when I'd say, start thinking about better mics and what else you can do to make it more successful.
Yeah, I would just say my advice would be just do it. Don't get hung up on it. Kind of like what you both were talking about, editing and all of that. It doesn't have to be perfect. If you have something to say, get out there and say it, and just don't be too hard on yourself, and enjoy the process. And it's fun. It's just go with it.
As we're wrapping up, please tell the people where they can find you, and if they have some scary stories lurking around, where they can send those.
Yeah, so we have a website, myskepticalsister.com, and you can write in there under the contact page, or you can write in your emails at myskepticalsister@gmail.com. And then you can find us on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, Google, most podcast catchers. Is that what they're called?
Podcatchers, yeah.
Podcatchers. Most podcatchers, we're there. So, Google us and find us.
Right on. And that'll all be in the show notes as well. So Erin, Meghann, thank you so much for coming on tonight and helping me take podcasting up an octave.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We loved it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If it was at all helpful, please share it with a podcaster or aspiring podcaster who needs to hear it. While you're at it, please leave me a rating or review, because just like your show, mine needs those to grow. Next week, I will be back talking about how to care for your voice in the winter and beyond. As a podcaster, you know that you cannot afford to lose your voice. In the meantime, you can find me over at Sonivia Studios on Instagram, where the party keeps going, and I will see you next week. Thanks for helping me take podcasting up an octave.